G'day painters, today we're finishing off the last of the HeroQuest characters, the Dwarf. Let's paint. This guy was primed with grey Seer from a rattlecan. I've actually swapped to Vallejo grey since I did this character, because the grey Seer has too smooth of a finish and occasionally it causes me some issues with the paint not sticking well. I used tan flesh to block in all his flesh. Remember to get his legs. For whatever reason, I just assumed he was wearing pants, so I missed them at first, though I did at least notice before I started the other colours. For all of the cloth, I used royal purple. So that's the tunic, the armour trim, the folds on the boots, and the cloth parts of his wrist guards. I'm a pretty big fan of this purple. Unfortunately, it's from Pro Acryl, and I have issues getting that locally. I think the magentas from the Army Painter Fanatic range would be a good substitute. I've been using them on another project and I really like them, but I didn't have the Fanatic paints when I painted the HeroQuest models. In the art, our dwarf friend has black hair and beard. I wanted it to look different to the Barbarian's black hair, so I went with a different technique and started by blocking it in black. I also hit the boots and the large flat part of his axe with black too while I'm at it. Next it was time for the medals. All the silver medals got blocked in with plate mail. This was his armour, axe blade, the circlet on his head, and the metal parts on his boots. Then it was hammered copper for the gold parts. All the smaller armour plates on his belt and wrists, the shoulder guards, the dragon on his axe, and the trim on his shoulders and wrists all get hit with gold. I did his rings at this point too, but if you're worried about messing them up when you're doing the shading and highlighting for the skin later, you can definitely leave them. I broke an important rule while doing the trim on his armour and used one of my sable hairbrushes for it. When I went to grab a synthetic brush, I realised I'd killed all the tips on them, so I had the choice of running to the hobby store, which is 30 minutes away, or using a sable hairbrush so I could continue painting. It was only a small part, and I was careful to make sure I conditioned my brush straight after, so it was fine. But I definitely made sure to pick up some new synthetic brushes when I was at the hobby store next. Time to establish some shadows. Both the metals and the black all got hit with a wash of dark tone. I go back and forth on using dark tone on golds. I like the definition it gives, but I also feel like it can be too stark at times. You definitely want to be careful of pooling if you use it on golds, but it does give a nice effect. On the art, the dwarf has a pretty dark skin tone, darker than the paints I had available at the time. So rather than a normal flesh tone, I used Darkoath Flesh contrast paint for the wash and to darken the skin. I did this with a 50-50 mix of Darkoath Flesh and contrast medium. You could do this straight from the pot if you wanted, especially since I ended up giving this 2 coats, but I wanted to have more control on just how much I darkened it, and thinning it down gives you that control. Time to highlight the hair. I do an overbrush of a 50-50 mix of black and Necromancer Cloak first to start building the highlights. The reason I'm doing an overbrush instead of a normal dry brush is I want to establish this as the mid-tone and only leave the black in the recesses. So I do this pretty heavily. Next, it's Necromancer Cloak, and I do this as a more traditional highlight, hitting all the raised parts and edges. Then a 50-50 mix of Necromancer Cloak and Uniform Grey for the final highlights, just looking to pick out the top edges and raised parts. I felt like Tanned Flesh would be a bit too light for the first highlight jump, so I added a bit of Darkoath Flesh to it to make the gradient a bit smoother. This was around 2 parts Tanned Flesh to 1 part Darkoath Flesh. Then I'm just working around the model, picking out all the raised muscles to start the highlights off. Then with Tanned Flesh I do the same, just working in smaller areas and focusing on the raised parts and the parts facing upwards. While I gently caress his muscles with my brush, it's time for a sub plug. If you're enjoying the video and want to see more content from me, why not hit that subscribe button? And while you're there, just click the like button too. I'm a tiny channel and every sub and like helps immensely. After begging for likes and subs, I used Barbarian Flesh for the final highlight. With this I work in the smallest areas just to finish off the highlights nicely. I realised when I did the hair and beard I didn't highlight the rest of the black, because I'm good at this painting stuff. So I broke out Necromancer Cloak and gave the black on the axe and the boots an edge highlight. Eyes! White, then a dot of Necromancer Cloak. Nothing fancy here. For highlighting the purple, I put both Royal Purple and Lustful Purple on my palette and started from around 2 parts Royal Purple to 1 part Lustful Purple for the first highlight. And then kept adding more Lustful Purple for each layer. I find purple to be one of those colours you want to make fairly small jumps with, otherwise they're really obvious and don't give the smooth gradient you're looking for. Shining Silver is our highlight colour of choice for the metals. The main thing to be aware of at this step is the chips and cracks on the axe blade. You want to do an edge highlight on them to help them stand out nicely. This is obviously easier if you're working with a brush that has a nice tip on it. I hadn't been to the hobby store yet. Then it's Greedy Gold for the gold highlights. There's a fair bit of gold on this guy and a decent amount of it is facing upwards and needs highlighting. The dragon head on the axe can be a bit of a trap here. The parts that should be highlighted on the bottom side are different to the top side, and the bottom side should only get very minor highlights. You only really want to pick out the very top edge of the parts facing upwards for the bottom. Then to finish him off, it's the gems. There are a lot of gems on this guy. The axe head, the dragon's eyes, and his rings all have gems on them. The first step is to block them all in with Necromancer Cloak. I don't think it's necessary to show all the colours here, but I did 3 different coloured gems here. I did red, green, and blue. I made sure to do the dragon eyes as red, then other than that, I just picked a random colour for each of the other gems. If you're looking for the specific colours I used, I'll put them in a separate section in the description to make it easier, rather than flooding the screen with 6 different paint colours. The first step is to block in the bottom half of the gems with your darker colour. Then around the bottom third of the gem with your lighter colour. Then a tiny dot of white on the top of the gem, and a slightly larger dot on the bottom of the gem, inside the colours you did in the previous step. And time for the base. The same as the elf, this guy has no texture on his base, so I decided he was standing on stone or pavement and did it grey. It takes a couple of layers to get a nice smooth finish, so just take your time. Then black for the base rim. No model is complete without the base rim being done. And he's finished. I'm pretty happy with how he came out, and I found out the guy these were commissioned for is playing the dwarf in their game, and apparently he loves how it came out, so that's always good news. That's the last HeroQuest character and the last of my HeroQuest videos for now. But don't worry, there are still plenty of videos to come. So if you've enjoyed my video and would like to see what I paint next, why not subscribe? And if you've liked the video, obviously hit the like button. Thanks for watching, catch you in the next video.